B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Friday, August 2nd, 2019. The other night in the debate in Detroit, Hawaii Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard shocked a lot of people when she launched a verbal attack on one of the front runners in the race, California Senator Kamala Harris. And we're going to fact check the remarks that Gabbard made and also some attacks that Joe Biden made on Senator Harris. But the reaction over the last couple of days has been remarkable and disappointing to me, because there is a smear campaign aimed at Tulsi Gabbard. And let me begin by saying I have not decided who I'm going to vote for in the 2020 primaries. I am open-minded. I will candidly admit that I give advantage to Bernie Sanders, but his age and the array of fresh faces have caused me to sit back and say, I'm not going to make an early decision here. I want to hear these candidates out. And Tulsi Gabbard is a mixed bag. We have discussed on this program her ancient history as a homophobic individual. And that was when she was in her 20s, about 15 years ago. She declares that she no longer holds the views that she espoused when she was a 21 or 22-year-old member of the legislature in Hawaii. And the way people dredge that up as a way of dismissing her candidacy and her clear calls to end regime change wars, that is the message that attracts me to Tulsi Gabbard. Now, I'm on a list somewhere to get an interview with her, and maybe it'll pan out, maybe it won't. I've got a lot of questions that I want to ask her. But what has occurred is that people who support Kamala Harris have been smearing Tulsi Gabbard with the same claim that Harris herself made, not on the debate stage to Gabbard's face, but in the spin room after the debates the other night. So last night I was surprised when a political science professor from here in California, Cynthia Boaz, who teaches at Sonoma State University, and by the way, she was a Bernie Sanders supporter in 2016. She says she is not currently aligned with him. But she posted a one-sentence item on Facebook that was a result of her frustration of being bashed on Twitter. And Professor Boaz put a simple statement: the Gabbard stands are as ridiculous as the Bernie bros. Now, I'd never heard that stands thing before, and I actually made a post and said, what the hell does that mean? And she explained it's just her way of saying staunch supporters. Now, I don't know why she chose that particular comparison. After all, she was a Sanders supporter in 2016, and we know that many of those Bernie Bros comments were just smears that came from the Clinton campaign. Yes, there were a couple of obstreperous Bernie supporters who were male, and they probably deserve that little sobriquet. But to keep it alive today, in the current climate, is just stupid. And here's a political science professor who I've seen put up interesting posts and foster some good discussion. And she's sowing discord. Yeah, like we blame the Russians for, right? These are Americans sowing discord. And they were doing it. I'm not singling out Professor Boaz in this comment, but back in 2016, the battle between Sanders and Clinton supporters sowed a lot of discord. And I'm not aware of any of it that was amplified by Russian bots or the troll farm in St. Petersburg. It was an all-American food fight. So let me read a couple of lowlights from this Facebook thread, and if you care to look at the whole thing, I've linked to it in the show file for today's podcast. So again, the statement that all these people responded to was, the Gabbard stands are as ridiculous as the Bernie bros. So a guy named Matthew writes, given that the most vocal ones probably come from the same place, St. Petersburg, I'm not terribly surprised. Then Carl Erickson posts an NBC News report, Russia's propaganda machine discovers 2020 Dem contender Tulsi Gabbard. And Professor Boaz explains that there is a report that NBC it promoted that Russian bots had decided that Tulsi Gabbard was the biggest disruptor in this campaign, and they were going to dive in. So Boaz says Gabbard supporters on Twitter are pretty much consistently hostile, paranoid, and extremely defensive. Maybe it's all a ruse to make her look bad. If so, it's working. Now, I don't spend a lot of time on Twitter, and I'm generally allergic to it. And in fact, in my post, I suggested that the professor spend less time on Twitter because I don't see that it produces much that is valuable. So then Jessica McCoy, who I think is a good contributor to this thread, says, I was a Sanders delegate in Iowa in 2016. I know many people who were Sanders supporters, and they don't like to be called Bernie bros. Then Tangerine Bolin, a woman I interviewed a few years back. She was a plaintiff in a lawsuit against the NSA. She said, every group can be obnoxious and awful. We've entered the second phase of information warfare during elections. It really launched in 2015, and this time around it will be improved, so to speak. And then we hear from Christopher Cox. I'm a little confused. I mean, she was the most Googled candidate after the debate, yet pretty much is being lambasted all over Twitter. I'm not saying it's a conspiracy, but it really is odd. She's far, far from a perfect candidate. I'm only lukewarm to her, but it seems to me she completely ate Harris's lunch in the debate. All right. So then there are other exchanges. I'm not going to read every one of them to you, but I was surprised to see Stephen Zunis, professor of politics at the University of San Francisco, with a brief comment, again referring to the original post. The Gabbard stands are as ridiculous as the Bernie bros, and he says, more so, I'd say. My interpretation is that the Gabbard supporters are worse than the worst of the Bernie bros. McCoy comes back. She says, no doubt there are annoying people supporting all the candidates. We have this weirdly competitive thing in our society where it seems impossible to have differences of opinion without shitting on people we disagree with and finding ways to slur them. So then Boaz says that she's heard from people. She's not going to call people Bernie bros anymore, and so she's kind of moving on from that. And she thinks that Bernie's time has passed. That's Boaz. Then we come back to the Russian connection. Boaz, data systems analysts, determined in February that Russian bots had selected Gabbard's campaign as the one to promote in order to sow discord among other Democratic candidates. Well, and then Boaz continues. She posts items, Tulsi Gabbard is not your friend, and that these aren't smears if they are true. And Boaz declares she is an Assad apologist at best. Now, I find this offensive. And I also find it ridiculous that in August, this was going on the first day of August, and the first primaries in Iowa and New Hampshire are not until February. And people are locking down and getting snarky and freely passing along smears. And to see a political science professor start it and promote it, I find pretty disappointing. So let's turn to Caitlin Johnston. She is the Australian writer who nails American politics better than anybody on these shores. She said in the race to determine who will serve as commander-in-chief, Night 2 of the Democratic presidential debate saw less than 6 minutes dedicated to discussing U.S. military policy during the 180-minute event. And she says, from the moment Jake Tapper said, I want to turn to foreign policy, to the moment Don Lemon interrupted Tulsi Gabbard as she was preparing to correctly explain how Trump is supporting al-Qaeda in Idlib, approximately 5 minutes and 50 seconds had elapsed. Night 1 of the CNN debates saw almost twice as much time on foreign policy, and she suggests that the discrepancy could be due to the fact that Night 2 was the slot allotted to Gabbard, and that CNN, a virulent establishment propaganda firm with an extensive history of promoting lies and brazen psyops in facilitation of U.S. imperialism, To Johnstone, it makes sense that they would try to avoid a subject which would inevitably lead to unauthorized truth-telling on the matter. And attacking the authoritarian prosecutorial record of Senator Kamala Harris to thunderous applause, Gabbard criticized the way her opponent, and we'll go through those charges a little later in the fact-checking part. Johnston continues, Harris, who it turns out fights very well when advancing but folds under pressure, had no answer for Gabbard's attack, preferring to focus on attacking Biden. Later, when she was a safe distance out of Gabbard's earshot, she uncorked a long-debunked but still effective smear that establishment narrative managers have been dying for an excuse to run wild with. Quote from Harris, "This coming from someone who has been an apologist for an individual, Assad, who has murdered the people of his country like cockroaches. She who has embraced and been an apologist for him in a way that she refuses to call him a war criminal. I can only take what she says in her opinion so seriously, and I'm prepared to move on." So that's her dismissal with smear. And I'll tell you, based on her history in San Francisco and California, this is vintage Kamala Harris. Now, Johnstone points out, and she follows Twitter more than I do, that the term Assad is now showing number 5 trending on Twitter. But Gabbard's name is nowhere to be seen. Now, she's the one who introduced the attacks that led to the smear that's entirely connected to her. Journalist Michael Tracy tweeted, "Somehow I have a hard time believing that Assad is the top trending item in the U.S., but Tulsi is nowhere to be found." And Johnstone cites Josh Rogan in the Washington Post with a frantic lie-filled Twitter storm, claiming with no evidence that Gabbard lied when she said she'd met with Assad for purposes of diplomacy and that she helped Assad whitewash a mass atrocity. Joy Reid of MSNBC gleefully leapt into the smearing frenzy, falsely claiming that Gabbard will not criticize Assad no matter what. And she actually has criticized Assad. She's called him a war criminal. But that doesn't matter. So I encourage you to read the rest of Johnstone's piece. Next, I have linked in the show file to all of the articles I'm mentioning here. David Massiotra, writing at the American Conservative, notes that Robert Mueller, St. Bob, was central in promoting the false claim of WMD by Iraq that led to our invasion. And this is what Gabbard said on the debate stage and afterward, that we were lied to. And she says, look, I joined the military after 9/11, and we were lied to when we were sent to Iraq. And this author writes, polling well below Biden in the race is Tulsi Gabbard. She alone on the Democratic stage has made criticism of American militarism central to her candidacy. Gabbard offers an intelligent and humane perspective on foreign affairs. She's called the regime change philosophy disastrous, advocated for negotiation with hostile foreign powers, and backed a reduction in drone strikes. She pledges, if she becomes president, to end American involvement in Afghanistan. When Chris Matthews asked Gabbard about Biden's support for the Iraq War, she said it was the wrong vote. People like myself who enlisted after 9/11 because of the terrorist attacks were lied to. We were betrayed. And a final quote here, her moral clarity is rare in the political fog of the presidential circus. She cautions against accepting the guise of humanitarian justification for war, and notes that rarely does the American government bomb and invade a country to actually advance freedom or protect human rights. And over at BuzzFeed, Rosie Gray, who says she covered Ron Paul when he ran for president in 2008 and in 2012, makes some interesting comparisons, not all of them flattering, to Ron Paul and his libertarian anti-war stance with Gabbard's current position. And I don't embrace every argument here, but I know some people who listen to this podcast who are Ron Paul supporters, and so you might find that a compelling comparison. Also, while we're talking about Syria, the government, the dreaded Assad government, said it has agreed to a conditional ceasefire starting last night in northwestern Syria. I hope that holds and that the long-running and bloody conflict will come to an end. So Joe Garofoli, who is the political columnist for the San Francisco Chronicle, decided to do a fact check of the attacks on Senator Kamala Harris. And when I first read this line, here's a look at what they said and the context behind their often vaguely worded attacks, I thought this was going to be a big defense of Harris, and it's not. It does ding Joe Biden, who stumbled through his attack on her. There was a situation when Harris was district attorney, the police crime lab technician was stealing cocaine, and there were over 1,000 cases that were tainted by this. And Biden claimed that a federal judge ordered 1,000 people freed. It was actually a lower court judge, a local judge, who ordered the charges dismissed. And Harris was found by a court to have failed to disclose information that clearly should have been disclosed. Then Gabbard said that Harris put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana violations while she was Attorney General. The actual figure is 1,974. She didn't back legalizing weed for recreational use until last year. She opposed the ballot measures to legalize marijuana for adult use here in California, and she did, in fact, laugh on a radio show when she admitted to smoking weed in college. Now, Biden also said that Harris was Attorney General, and because of the busing argument they had had before, that she didn't lift a finger to desegregate schools in San Francisco and Los Angeles. That is true, but there was no basis at the time that I can recall to launch a suit like that, so I think that's kind of an empty criticism. Now, Gabbard also said that Harris blocked evidence that would have freed an innocent man from death row until the courts forced her to do so. This is the Kevin Cooper case, and as Attorney General, Kamala Harris opposed allowing him to have a new DNA test. Now, he's still on death row, and many people believe he's innocent, but that has not been confirmed, and Gabbard's claim does include an exaggeration there. And finally, Gabbard said that Harris kept people in prison beyond their sentences to use as cheap labor for the state of California. That is an accurate reference to arguments made by her attorneys to keep people in prison so they'd be available for firefighting crews. And I think they get paid $1 an hour or $1 a day. I mean, it's ridiculous, a very low amount. So that's my coverage of the knives out for Tulsi Gabbard. And again, I continue to be interested in her candidacy. I need to hear far more about her before I would commit to vote for her. But I reject these ugly smears that are really just payback for her truth-telling about Kamala Harris. On another front, Kevin Gosztola, the founder of Shadowproof, which is observing its 4th year in existence this week. Congratulations, Kevin. You've done a lot of great reporting. And he did a deep dive, takes 20 minutes to read. It's over at Medium, and I've linked to it. It's called A Guide to Bad Faith Arguments Against Bernie Sanders. And it goes into detail about the attacks on Medicare for All, about, the claim that middle-class taxes will go up, and also the way that MSNBC has marginalized and criticized Sanders without factual basis during the current election cycle here. This came as a surprise when I started my news search this morning that Trump has capitulated after getting early indications that there were senators who would not vote to confirm extreme loyalist John Ratcliffe, a Republican congressman from Texas, as the next head of the National Intelligence, Director of National Intelligence operation. Trump blamed it on the media, but it really is the Republicans who signaled that they were unlikely to confirm him. And I want to credit Trevor Aronson, my pal at The Intercept, who broke the news about John Ratcliffe's hugely inflated biography. So Trump tweets, our great Republican Congressman John Ratcliffe is being treated very unfairly by the lamestream media. Come on, Don. That's Sarah Palin's line. Rather than going through months of slander and libel, I explained to John how miserable it will be for him and his family to deal with these people, and he's therefore decided to stay in Congress, where he's done an outstanding job. Now, the other part of this is that Trump is refusing to follow the law that created the office of the Director of National Intelligence. That law says if the post is vacated, that the deputy will be the interim director. But that would be Susan Gordon. She's been in the intelligence community for 30 years. She is the principal deputy there, and she's got allies on both sides of the aisle. But Trump did not allow her to personally deliver a recent intelligence briefing after she arrived at the White House. And it's clear that he wants to go around the law and find a more compliant individual to serve in this job until the Senate confirms a permanent replacement. And we've seen how Trump loves to keep these jobs open for months on end because it gives him more leverage over his temporary hires. Now, we're learning that Susan Gordon may retire if told by the White House that Trump won't promote her, even temporarily, and that may give him an out in terms of violating the law related to succession. Now, I've been reluctantly reporting on this, but it's clear that Kanye West can get through to Trump whenever he wants. And Kanye told Trump to stand up for A$AP Rocky, this rapper who got into an altercation on the streets of Stockholm. Today, the trial ended. They don't have a verdict, but the judge has allowed that Rocky and his two co-defendants, one was a bodyguard, can remain free and even leave Sweden. The verdict will not be delivered for another 2 weeks. And I'm not invested in seeing Rocky convicted or declared innocent. But to see Trump intervene in a foreign country on behalf of a rapper, I mean, he even sent his special envoy for hostage affairs to observe the trial. And this guy said he wasn't going home without Rocky. We live in bizarre times, and the cronyist way that Trump operates is just so disgusting. I mean, there have to be other Americans, like the two guys from Mill Valley who are accused of murdering a police officer in Rome. We didn't send the envoy for hostage affairs to Rome. So, it is bizarre. I don't have a whole lot of comment. Trump signed the 2-year budget deal that avoids a government shutdown. They shoveled more cash at the Pentagon. They shoveled some more money into programs favored by the Democrats. But it's ugly all the way around. It runs up the deficit, and of course the Republicans don't care about that anymore. 23 Republicans and 5 Democrats voted against it, but it passed 67 to 28. Consider the source here. The man I'm about to tell you about, Dr. Robert Epstein, is the former editor of Psychology Today magazine. He describes himself as a Hillary Clinton supporter in 2016. But at the time, he believed that Google was rigging search results to favor Hillary Clinton. And the article I have on this is from a publication or an outlet I've never heard of before, bizpackreview.com. It's the first I've heard of this story. Apparently, Ted Cruz held a hearing of a subcommittee that he chairs sometime in the recent past. The article doesn't say. It was published on July 29th. But Dr. Epstein says that Google manipulated its search results, and it's not clear how Dr. Epstein then concludes that their deceptive search methods moved 2.6 million votes in the direction of Hillary Clinton. Now, he says that it could be as high as 10.4 million. And I don't take any of that with, I don't take that as fact. But the central issue, that search results can be manipulated, that Google has over 80% control of the search market, that Eric Schmidt, who was the CEO or the board chairman at Google during the 2016 cycle, was a big supporter of Hillary Clinton. And so I do not claim this as fact. I bring you this report because I think it deserves further investigation. And once again, it underscores that it was domestic actors who were operating to deliver the election to Trump or to Clinton Not the damn Russians. This is a very interesting report. In fact, before I dive into it, I want to thank the people who support my work at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions, including Polina Vasilev, Susan Lundgren, Andrew Harnack, and Janet Price. They each kick in $5 or $10 a month. Could you do that? If you nod your head, will you do that? I'd appreciate it. Visit peterbcollins.com, click on menu, click on Become a Subscriber. You land on the sign-up page. Easy choices of a PayPal subscription. You don't like PayPal? You can mail it in to Box 150, 660, San Rafael, California, 94915. Bonus books available. I've got Dr. Frank's Trump on the Couch. Not Bush. I have a copy of that, but I'm not going to give it to you. And I also have 2100, A Dystopian Utopia, for new annual subscribers who cough up a mailing address in the continental U.S. So, to that Yahoo News story, I give them credit. They somehow came into possession of an FBI intelligence bulletin dated May 30th of this year. It originated in the Phoenix field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, describes conspiracy theory-driven domestic extremists as a growing threat. Now, they focus on QAnon and on the Pizzagate promoters, including the guy who went to the pizza place in Washington and tried to get into the non-existent basement while he was carrying a weapon. But get this. The FBI said another factor driving the intensity of this threat is the uncovering of real conspiracies, or cover-ups, involving illegal, harmful, or unconstitutional activities by government officials or leading political figures. Now, nobody is mentioned there. But how about Russiagate? How about all those FBI frame-ups of so-called domestic terrorism suspects? And how about 9/11? I'll get to that in a moment. But this story, and I recommend that you read it, I don't agree with everything they write, but they note that the FBI has stopped separating white supremacist and black nationalist groups, and they simply refer to them now as racially motivated. And I think that's a way to cover up their failure to properly investigate and prosecute offenders who are white nationalists. So, in May, an FBI official said the Bureau now classifies domestic terrorism into 4 categories: racially motivated violent extremism, anti-government, anti-authority extremism, animal rights, environmental extremism, and abortion extremism. So the conspiracy theories would be part of anti-government extremism, right? And we know that the tag conspiracy theory was generated by the CIA as a way of marginalizing people who challenged the Warren Commission investigation into the JFK assassination. And today, 60 to 80% of Americans believe there was a cover-up in the JFK case. And I want to take this opportunity to restate that my focus is on the cover-ups. And cover-ups inevitably relate to conspiracy stories, where the obvious or the likely conspirators are blaming others as a way to divert attention and claim that they couldn't possibly be accurate. And, of course, this story goes out of its way to dismiss the Seth Rich investigation as a conspiracy theory. Wouldn't be mainstream news if they didn't do that. So to 9/11, I want to congratulate Richard Gage and the others who have not given up at 9/11 Architects and Engineers for Truth. And recently, the fire department, called the Franklin Square and Munson Fire District in suburban New York, passed a resolution. And it starts off honoring one of their own who died at the World Trade Center on September 11th, Thomas Hetzel. And then it goes on to note that other members of the fire department were there. Many of them have life-threatening illnesses as a result. Whereas the Board of Commissioners recognizes the significant and compelling nature of the petition before the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District reporting unprosecuted federal crimes on 9/11. Whereas the overwhelming evidence presented in said petition demonstrates beyond any doubt that pre-planted explosives and or incendiaries, not just airplanes, and the ensuing fires caused the destruction of the 3 World Trade Center buildings, killing the vast majority of the victims who perished that day. Whereas the victims of 9/11, their families, the people of New York City and our nation, demand that every crime related to the attacks of September 11 be investigated to the fullest and that every person who was responsible face justice. Speaking of facing justice, it has been 5 years since Eric Garner was killed because of an illegal chokehold for selling loosies on the streets. And the cop who did that, Daniel Pantaleo, was finally set up to be removed from the police department. Now, I don't understand the Byzantine process in New York, but I will concede that Mayor de Blasio has in many ways been muzzled during this lengthy process. Apparently, an underling has recommended to the police commissioner that Pantaleo be fired, and now it's up to the commissioner to take that action. As you know, I think Twitter should suspend Trump for his hate-filled tweets that violate their own policies. And this week, Twitter suspended an account that the president had retweeted just hours earlier. It was from the account under the name of Lynn Thomas. It accused Democrats of being the true enemies of America. And just a few hours later, Twitter suspended the account, confirming to CNN it had broken the platform's rules, but they didn't say what rules had been broken. And when Trump recently used racist language to attack the 4 progressive Democratic congresswomen, a Twitter spokesperson told CNN that the president's tweets were not against its rules. Come on. That's bullshit. And we understand that the Lynn account, Lynn Thomas, promotes QAnon material. Somebody please explain that to me, will you? And finally today, if you either come through or fly in or out of San Francisco International Airport, bring your own water bottle. Because effective August 20th, you will not be able to buy a plastic bottle filled with water at SFO. The airport is the first in the nation to ban these single-use plastic bottles because, well, there were 2.8 billion pounds of plastic bottles recycled in 2017. We discard 16 billion pounds of plastic in our oceans every year. 50% is the estimated share of plastic that is used just once and thrown away. And it takes about 6 times as much water to produce a water bottle as there is in the actual container. Well, I support this. I always carry my own water bottle, and of course I have to guzzle it when I go through the airport security checkpoints. Hey, thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. You're free to share it with absolutely everyone. It's on YouTube, and I'm Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.